The title of my talk was Veggies Taste Better When They're Grown from Our Own Gardens. And of course, that's what all of us are really playing with, is growing the goodies that we particularly like. And I think all of us are, it's kind of an obvious statement to say, but I wanted to cover some of the reasons why it is better to grow our own vegetables. Number one, you can pick it literally the moment that you need it to serve for lunch or dinner or breakfast or whenever you're going to have it. Each evening, I will go out when the sun has gone beyond my garden hill, because we're on the northeast side of a hill up in Pasadena. So after about 5 o'clock, I can go out, and that's when I can do my work in the garden because I won't have the sun directly on me. So that is when I pick my tomatoes and everything else that is in the garden. It's that fresh picked essence that is really the most delicious thing about growing your own. You can literally go out there and pick it and eat it. Certainly some of those tomatoes, especially the cherry tomato size, they make it right into my mouth. They don't even make it into the pan to come in to feed my husband for dinner. You know, I have to, of course, taste test everything to make sure it's going to be okay, right? In the case of lettuce and greens and all that, they are going to be very nice and crispy as soon as you pick them, because you will have kept them watered well enough. Certainly the vitality of the plant will have been at its optimum in order to produce that food. The flavors will be fully expressed in those tomatoes and corn and beans and everything else that you are growing. And of course, the nutrient value in all those things is going to be at its height just for you to be able to pick it. If you consider that all those nutrients and the vitality of the item that you're growing is going to be starting to lessen the moment that you harvest it. So the whole concept of picking a tomato and setting it on your counter for several days to supposedly ripen up is really an incorrect thought process about how things work and when the best time to pick things is. We do have the advantage of growing our own by being able to let it stay on the vine until it ripens completely. And you do want to, when you harvest it immediately, it will keep longer if you do need to refrigerate it. And one last note, that you don't want to refrigerate tomatoes unless you have cut them. Sometimes if you have a little damaged area on the tomato, you want to cut it off, but you've already served 45 tomatoes for dinner that evening, so you will have to refrigerate it. That's the only time you should refrigerate your tomatoes, because there is a process of cooling that goes on when you refrigerate it, that it literally breaks down the cells that are in the tomato holding that, the tomato juice and the flesh and all that. When they get broken down, that ends up tasting mushy to you. So if you purchase tomatoes, the ones out of season, and you cut it and it tastes kind of mushy, that's why, because it is called cooling damage, because those cells structure has been broken. Okay, these are the kinds of things, fruits and vegetables that were native to the Americas. And most of these are southern, Central and Southern America. But the ones that are native to North America are cranberries, And one trip that my husband and I took out east, we went to a cranberry bog, and it was really quite wonderful. They had even some of the tools that they used to use to harvest the cranberries. Okay, here's the potatoes. And you might consider growing some potatoes just out of the curiosity of it. If you have purchased potatoes at the grocery store, but you haven't eaten them and they've started to actually sprout, you can go ahead and plant them. Now they do like very loose soil, so perhaps you're even in your compost pile, but you plant them about an inch deep, and it can just be the portion of it. You'll notice those little eyes in the potato. You need several of those in each piece in order to be able to have the sprouts come out of that, and some of them will become roots and some of them will become leaves. So here's all the leaves coming up from many of these pieces, and then they grow all for the season. And when it starts to die back, you know that the potatoes are actually starting to be formed underneath. And then you can start picking them at any time. And you can kind of scrape away the soil mixture and harvest a couple that you think are the good size, and then bring the dirt back onto the rest of the potatoes so that they can actually continue to develop more. So leaves. We've got cabbages, and these are several different kinds of cabbages. Celery. Now, if any of you are cooks, you will really want to grow celery, because this part here, the straight part, this is about where they get cut off for what we purchase at the grocery store. But you have another half amount of that plant is all that wonderful foliage. And of course, that is what makes great additions for soups and stews and everything else. So it's wonderful to be able to grow your celery, not only to pull off the stalks that we recognize from the grocery store, but to actually utilize all that greenery as part of our salads, whether raw in salads or cooked in the stews and soups and all that good stuff. Lettuces, of course, these are a couple of what are called butter heads. The beautiful coloring on this one, the green on this one that begins more to form more of a head. The real value of butter heads that, of course, I grew up with it, so to me that's the best kind of lettuce there is. Much more flavorful than the iceberg. But you harvest these outer leaves so that you really are leaving only the small portion that is at the base. That way you can plant this coming month and in October, plants that you will keep harvesting off of just those outer leaves for the next 9 months. And instead of letting the head come to a head and then harvesting the whole thing, and you're ending up with 432 heads of lettuce all at once in the spring to try to deal with. This way, all winter long, you can be having just these nice tender outer leaves, say once a week, because things will grow more slowly over the winter. That way you'll have that great lettuce all winter long and all the way into late spring, when the heat will tell these plants to get their seed stalk up, and then they'll become bitter. But in the meantime, you've planted it once in the early fall, and then you've let them grow and you harvest them for all those months until the mid-spring. Now, onions are leaves that we are harvesting. Here's the beginning of it, and as each of the onions gets larger. And then, of course, once you peel that outer sheath, the dried sheath, you can literally peel away those leaves, which are each of those levels of the onions. Spinach, same thing as the lettuce. Just harvest the outer ones and leave these little ones that are about 1 inch in size. Leave a couple of those left on the plant to continue doing their photosynthesis, and a week later or so, you'll be able to harvest those plants as well. The fun thing that I found in the early part of when we still lived up in Davis, and I would attend the Sacramento farmers markets, was when we had the first influx of the immigrants from Southeast Asia, the Hmong and the Vietnamese, and they started bringing this to the farmers markets. These are pea shoots. Now, of course, I had grown up just planting the pea seeds and then waiting for the fruits. But here, these folks had figured out this whole amount of food value in just the shoots, the tender shoots, as they come up at the end of the each of the little vines. And of course, like with any plant, ornamentals or vegetables, when you trim back, resprouts and adds more. So you are, by harvesting these individual shoots, maybe just 4, 5, 6 inches of it, you end up encouraging the plant to send out more shoots and consequently more food. So that's something to try. So the immature flowers, the portion of the plant that we eat for the fall and winter cool season, are of course the artichoke, the broccoli, and the braca flower, which is a cross between broccoli and cauliflower. And this particular one I just absolutely love because of this patterning. It's just a spiral pattern on there. This, one of the first varieties that came out that did this was Romanesco, but there are quite a few that have been bred since that time. And so for people who feel that broccoli is a little too strongly flavored, this is a good one to offer to them because it really is much milder and sweeter because it's been crossed with the cauliflower. So as with all things, there is an exception, and all the fall, winter, cool season things, we generally eat the roots, the stems, the leaves, and the immature fruit. But on peas, we do eat the fruit as well. And so these are the kinds like the super snap that you eat the entire pod. My husband prefers the kind that you shell and you eat just the peas on the inside. And then of course there's the what are called oriental peas, which stay pretty flat and you use them in the stir fries because the little pea in there remains pretty immature. Okay, so these are the best growing conditions for cool season crops. The air temperature, and you notice we're not going to get anywhere near that this weekend for sure, between 55 and 75. And this isn't for the germination. The germination can be much hotter, up to 85 of the soil temperature. But for the growing conditions, once you've planted it or transplanted it, then the air conditions are going to be as low as 55, but as high as 75, even 80. And you do need, because it is growing just the plant itself, those pieces, the roots, the stems, the leaves, and the immature fruit, you really need only 4 to 6 hours of direct sun every day. It's just peas need a bit more because they're also going through the additional effort of blossoming and then developing the fruit. So when you decide where you are going to be planting something that is going to be growing all winter long, the 4 to 6 hours is what you're looking for. As opposed to, we will see later on, the warm season, you do need more because most of it is the fruit that we will be eating. So they need that extra fertilizer and the next day, extra daily sun in order to go ahead with that further process. Okay, spring and summer. So this is pretty much what we're ending up with now. But some of these things, if the, you know, on the seed packet or on the little tag that you get when you buy your seedlings or your 4-inch or your 6-packs, it will say days to maturity. So if there is something that you would like to plant that says a maturity of maybe 60 days, even maybe 70 days, go ahead and plant it now, because we never know what the weather is going to do. It may end up being summer from now till who knows when, you know, Thanksgiving or so. Or it may shut down and get cold. Wouldn't that be nice? So this time of year, this is September, and also March is the same thing, where it's that transition between cool season and warm season. So this, I always recommend that people plant both the old season crops, like more of those summer ones with, say, a 60 or 70 day maturity, and the new crops, like the ones we just went through, the cool season. Because then whatever happens with the weather, you're going to end up with something food-wise to be able to enjoy. Instead of trying to guess ahead and then it end up being a different kind of weather, and then you're left without anything to enjoy for eating. So melons, now this, you may be able to barely discern that this has kind of a coating on it, and that's because this cantaloupe is grown on a trellis. Here's the wire trellis up here, and it is a pantyhose that the melon is inside. And it's the pantyhose that has been tied to the trellis up here. Now you can do this even with banana squash, which of course, if any of you have grown that, it's like 3 feet long and 1.5 feet wide, big heavy thing. As what you're doing is you're putting it into the pantyhose, and then it is carrying the brunt of the weight as the melon or the squash or whatever it is, your winter squash, matures and gets heavier. If you didn't provide that, it would just fall, pull itself off of the vine and perhaps end its connection then completely. The other thing you can do is put the fruit onto an upturned pot, because then it will concentrate the sun coming in on that melon and therefore ripen it more. So winter squash, and of course, a common misconception is that winter squash you grow in winter and summer squash you grow in summer. And of course, that's not the case. You grow all squash in the summer. It's just that when it's called a winter squash, it's because you let it mature completely to the point at which its outer skin is cannot be punctured with your fingernail. And that means you can store it all winter and enjoy it whenever you would like it then. And of course, summer squash, that's what you harvest when it's immature and consequently nice and tender and small generally. And of course, tomatoes are always the one that got somebody into gardening in the first place. And there's so many varieties. Okay, the immature fruit of warm season. I mentioned earlier the snap beans or green beans. I will apologize for this photo because this obviously is a very mature corn, but I wanted to show you these beautiful colors of the Indian corn that we purchased out in Arizona when we had been on a trip. So this is by no means immature, but that wonderful sweet corn that you harvest and munch right there, that is definitely the immature corn. Cucumbers, you've got the long ones and you've got lemon cucumbers. And of course, there's the Armenian cucumber, which is like maybe 3 feet long. And it's got those ribs on the side, but you don't have to peel it. And consequently, it's a wonderful cucumber to grow. Eggplant in many shapes and colors. Peppers, I absolutely love all the colors. Now, all the peppers are green when they are immature. It is when they become mature that they may turn into one of the colors you see here. But the flesh on the inside is all going to be green. So this is definitely a very cosmetic way of adding color to your salads and just eating raw. Chili peppers and other kinds of immature squash. The best conditions for growing warm season, you'll notice that this air temperature is 65 to 95. So they could be doing fine with the weather we've had this last week, which has been up to about 95. But it's not, it's going to be suffering this weekend. So again, keep everything well watered and shaded if you can, if it's a more of a delicate kind of foliage. This is the direct sun minimum of 8 hours a day because it will develop the flavors much more extensively. And just because the plant has that extra amount of production that has to be done. And this is a good reason that when your blossoms of your peppers or your tomatoes or eggplant, whatever it is, the beans, when the blossoms first appear, that's when you want to give it another dose of fertilizer. And this can be the slow release kind, which is certainly what I prefer. So you create that nice environment initially with the soil, with all the amendments that you've added in. But then when it blossoms, that's when you go ahead and give it an extra dose of the fertilizer so that that plant has the energy to be able to continue putting out a whole batch of blossoms, setting the fruit, and then maturing the fruit to the point at which you want to eat it. Okay, the selection of varieties, especially if you grow from seed, you have a tremendous selection of different varieties that you can go ahead and utilize, because you get all sorts of variations on the theme. And this great example is this picture of all these carrots. You get short, stubby ones, you get long, thin ones, you get dark purple, you get yellow. Here's a super dark purple one. So all the different kinds of vegetables you can grow in your own garden. And microclimates are something that is very useful to a gardener, because in your garden, even if you just have a patio that's maybe 10 by 10 foot, each of those little corners and the center will be a slightly different little microclimate. You know, it may be windy around one corner, but it always gets direct sun on the other corner, whatever the variations might be. So you can utilize that into the placement of your particular the varieties that you are choosing. You also can stretch the seasons. Some lettuces especially, and peas, are early season, and certainly there's one tomato catalog. It's out of Florida. It's called Tomato Growers Supply, and they have all of their varieties listed or organized by season. They have early season, mid-season, late season tomatoes. They have all the cherry tomatoes together. Then they also cross-file them by color. So it's a wonderful catalog just to be able to utilize to figure out how you can have a succession of your tomatoes. And like Wando peas are wonderful for sowing right now because they are very tolerant of heat, but also at the end of the season. Like you will plant those in January, February, because you may end up getting a great crop of Wando peas long after your other peas have died back because it's gotten too hot for them. But the Wandos love it, so you get another set of peas toward the end of that season. You can also choose varieties according to how you're going to use them, how you're going to be harvesting them. If you're going to want them all at once because you want to, you know, can your tomatoes or do a whole session of drying or something, some sort of preservation technique, or if you want a few at a time for many, many months, which is the way I prefer my tomatoes to come. You know, I want to have maybe 4 or 5 at a time each evening for dinner, but I want them to be for months and months and months. So, and at this point, I think I had my first tomatoes in mid-June, and so my celebrity tomatoes, amazingly, still have about a dozen dozen fruits on each of them. So I am rationing them out so that I can continue harvesting all this time. So it's been a good 3 months that we've been having a great number of tomatoes. And the last big reason to go ahead and really consider the many varieties, especially in the, you know, the restaurant trade, they advertise that they're using baby squash or baby corn or whatever it is, or the gourmet varieties. There ain't no such thing. What these are when they are harvested is the timing. They're harvesting that corn when it's real teeny, or those baby squash, or the blossoms themselves here. It's the timing. And one reason to test your different varieties is literally, if you want to have a little baby squash, then hopefully you can try a whole bunch of different varieties of squash and harvest them when they are that size that you want them, and see which one tastes the best. Because as something gets larger and matures, it's going to develop its flavor. But if you really want that tiny size, then you can play with the varieties in the hopes of finding a small one that tastes as nice as some of the larger size ones. Okay, germination techniques. We talked about the growing conditions best for warm season and cool season crops. But what we're talking about now is to germinate the seeds, and consequently we're dealing with the soil temperature. So the cool season crops, you need soil temperature that's at least 50 degrees, but it could go up to 65 or even 70 degrees. And the warm season crops, of course, are a little bit higher, just to germinate the seed. So cool season crops like lettuce or cabbage or bok choy or any of those ones that you are considering to be planting now, if you started them now, literally now, where the soil temperature is probably 1 billion degrees because of this tremendous heat, your seeds may rot because you've watered them, but the temperature is just too hot for them to germinate. They literally have a hormone in them that says, this is not the best time to grow, therefore I'm not going to waste my energy in germinating this seed and getting this plant going. So do be cognizant of the soil temperature. Now, after we get really cold in the winter, as cold as we get, you can consider 50 degrees, that you put your hand flat on the soil and it feels really cold. It's probably not 50, it's under that. But if it just feels cool, then it's probably a good temperature to go ahead and start your seeds. So whether or not to direct sow your seeds, or whether to start them in like little 6-packs, the ones you want to use the direct seeding for are big ones, like squash and corn and beans and, you know, the big guys. Also, any root crops like your carrots, your parsley, parsnips, anything that is going to be maturing under the soil, you need to start by direct sowing where you are going to be letting them mature. So don't purchase corn that is in 6-packs at the store. Even kohlrabi, you know, well, kohlrabi is part of the kohl crops, like cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower. Those tend to get very leggy. You know, if you've got your soil temperature here and the stem has come up and it kind of starts wiggling around before it puts out its leaves, you can plant those a little deeper just so it gives it a more stable base to it. But most plants you will plant right at the level that they were growing. But the kohl crops do have what's called a cuticle on the outside that keeps it from rotting. But specific back to the sowing the seed, so this is a Speedling tray, and of course, when I come in person, I have a tray to show you. But I think my next slide has the advantage, so I'll wait. Yeah, here we go. The Speedling tray is a triangle shape like this. Now this is only 1 inch top here, but it goes down to 1/4 of an inch that is a hole for the drainage. And these Speedling trays come, I've now purchased ones that are 3 inches across, and it's about 3 inches deep. So the real advantage of these particular seeding trays is that it directs the roots down. Whereas anything else, especially your 6-packs, it'll just make the roots curl around and around and around, which then means you need to massage them in order to get them when you transplant them, so that the roots will then go out into the garden. Whereas with the Speedling tray, the roots are already headed straight down. And so there is very little transplant shock because you don't have to massage them around and they have to get reconnected with the soil. So most plants, you transplant them at the same depth. Of course, tomatoes, you always plant deeper because they are the only plant that will create a sturdier root system. And of course, potatoes are literally under the ground anyway. So the growing point is that right here, right at the junction of where the foliage goes up and it becomes roots going down there. So that is the growing point. So make sure when we say that it's grown at the same depth as the container, make sure that it is right at that point. And do handle by the leaves or the roots, not the stem, because the plant can put out more leaves, but if you crush this stem, it's out of luck completely. There's no way for it to go ahead and recreate itself or recover from that. Soil preparation, feed the soil, not the plants. You are establishing a great beginning for those plants. So all of these techniques are about the same in terms of creating a real sustainable root system. These are some terms to say it is rich soil, is that it's fertile, or that it's lean soil, that it's lacking in nutrients. Sweet soil, farmers used to literally taste the soil before there were all these fancy soil tests. So to say that it was sweet, it was a mid-range of pH, or that it was sour, it was acidic. And most vegetables do prefer about a 6.5 on the pH scale. Raised beds are a great way to really help your plants establish extensive root systems, both for early season and late season. Just because it's higher up, it will warm up and it'll stay warm longer when it starts to get a bit cool. But in the meantime, you're creating a great system just because it is kept watered nicely and it's got lots of organic matter, so it holds on but also does drain very, very well. It's one of those great things. The compost is the magic for both sandy soil and clay soil. Raised bed soil is easier to work because it's uncompacted, because there's never been any walking in there. You compact the soil, and of course it is great access for wheelchairs and the elders, less bending. You'll see on this bed that it has cross pieces of the wood so that you can sit on the edge of the bed, whereas this one just has the sharp edge. So that's a great way to make a bed much more helpful for someone who needs to sit down when they're doing the cultivating. Succession planting is a way of continually planting something so that you will be having a continual harvest. I had mentioned earlier about harvesting the lettuces leaf by leaf of those same plants. But this is going to be like for these beets, where you are harvesting the entire plant. Certainly you can harvest the leaves of the beets, but you kind of need to decide whether you're growing it for the leaves or whether you're growing it for the bulb. Because the more you harvest, and this goes for onions as well, the more you harvest the top portion, the leaves, you are depleting the bulb from being able to develop, because you're literally removing the energy that it's using in the leaves, that it's creating in the leaves, in order to feed the bulb. So succession planting, here's the every week or two, if you're going to be harvesting pretty frequently, or for things that are bolt prone, like cilantro or lettuce when you've sown them in the summer, because you're going to get very little food value off of it before it ends up bolting and going to seed. So that's 1 or 2 weeks apart. For 3 or 4 weeks apart is like if you're going to be growing your lettuce so that they come to a full head and then harvest it rather than the leaf by leaf, because you will need a consecutive set of full heads then. Now this is a great example of what not to do. I have a whole set of techniques, of course, that I have discovered what was not the best way to do something. So this is my bed, and you'll see it's got a kind of a berm around it here, so that when I filled this center portion with water, it was like a little lake. So what I did was, these are my beets, and when I got these few left, I figured it was time to go ahead and plant more seeds. So what I did was, each of these little stakes show that this was one variety, this was another variety, and this was the third variety. But of course, I sowed the seed, put in the label stakes, and then watered it, and the whole thing became a lake, and all the seeds went every which way. Of course, it was floating all around. So I ended up defeating my entire purpose of having put the label stakes in. However, it ended up working okay, because each of them had been a different color. I had the yellow one, I had the Chioggia, which is the one that looks like a bullet, you know, alternated rings, and then a regular red one. So, you know, sometimes these things just don't make sense, or it doesn't occur to you, and then you say, whoops, later. Okay. So companion planting and intercropping, there's quite a few books out about, you know, what to plant with what, for what reasons. This is not University of California research, but it is something that makes people feel a little more connected with how they're organizing what they're growing in their gardens. One of the theories is that a plant will help another plant to grow, like Carrots Love Tomatoes is the name of one of the books. Deterring pests, like putting garlic, deterring the aphids by planting them in a circle around your rose bushes. The moon phases tasks, like according to the waxing and the waning of the moon, determines where the energy is, either above the ground or below the ground. And a biointensive method, which is more like the basic tenets of sustainable agriculture that the university does sponsor. And so there's all these different ways of being able to look, and, you know, Farmer's Almanac will have some of these traits and all that. So it's many different approaches to gardening, of course, as you know. So the spacing of when you plant something, there are all these elements really to consider. The germination and maturity rates, for example, radishes germinate very quickly within a couple days. Carrots are very slow, maybe up to 3 weeks. So one technique is to mix radishes and carrots together and sow them in the bed. And you're depending on the radish to germinate quickly and be slowly but slowly continuing to grow. And what that does is it keeps the soil moving, so to speak, around where the carrots are. So because carrots can't break through a crust very easily. So as you keep watering to get the radishes germinated, the soil is nice and moist, and because it's slowly moving a little bit as the radish increases in size, the carrots over that 3-week period of time do end up germinating okay. So it's a nice pairing together. The growing zone, if you consider, okay, like you plant garlic, and that most of that growth happens just under the soil surface, so it's the roots. At the surface, the bok choy, it makes its big foliage just above the soil surface. In the mid-air zone will be where the cabbage develops, and then a trellis would be where the peas are growing. So an example is down here. This front row is, I guess, lettuce or bok choy or something. The peas are up on the trellis, and these back plants are either cauliflower or kohlrabi, cabbage. So each one is growing in a different zone, so to speak, as you look at it sideways. The sun orientation, for example, growing lettuce on the north side of peas or corn during the summer, so that they're not getting that direct sun. They are getting a little bit more shade from the tall peas and corn, and consequently you might get another week or 2 out of the lettuce before it bolts as well. The water zone, you do need to plant plants together that need the same amount of water. For example, you can't have just an herb bed with your basil next to your lavender or your rosemary. Basil and cilantro love lots of water. Rosemary and lavender don't want any water. Think in terms of the dry, rocky outcrops in Greece and Italy. That's where rosemary and lavender love it. Okay, so you have to plant things together. This is one reason that, like, basil is good to put with tomatoes, because they both love lots of water. Support and pest deterrence. The Three Sisters Garden, you may have heard that term. This is from the Native Americans. They plant corn. When the corn is about 6 inches tall, they plant beans, oops. And the beans then start crawling up the corn stalk. And then they plant the squash so that the leaves cover the entire soil surface and impede the evaporation of the water, but also they're all prickly and everything, so animals don't like crawling through there. So it's a combination of not only fostering the nitrogen fertilizer from the beans and the corn that is a heavy feeder, but also the squash, just in terms of working out with the deterring the pests. And of course, the mature size of the plants is an element. You know, here are the tiny little lettuces or spinach. Here's some celery. And then at the back here are broccoli. So you need to be aware of how big each plant is going to get and consequently space it accordingly. Now the growing pattern is another element. Now these strawberries are interplanted with the buttercrunch lettuce, which is the little loose head. So this is all planted in November. So the lettuce will be developing. The strawberries will be developing a little bit, more setting down their roots and really getting themselves situated as root systems. And all winter long, you'll be eating off of the lettuce. Now, once it starts to warm up a bit in the spring, the lettuce is going to start bolting because it's been going through all this cool weather. And now with the merest amount of summer warmth, it's going to be bolting and going to seed. So it's going to be tasting better, and you won't want to be harvesting it any longer. But by that time, the strawberries will have developed their wonderfully extensive root system, and consequently putting out the top growth and the berries, the blossoms that potentially will become berries. So all winter you're getting good lettuce, and the strawberries are just kind of making do, getting established. And then in the late spring, you're getting all the wonderful berries, but the lettuces are beyond their time. So that's another way of planting things closely together so that you're benefiting from the extensive fertilizing and amendments and all that stuff that you put into your soil, but the plants are doing their own thing. Trellising and staking provides these 5 different kinds of benefits. It utilizes airspace for growing. You can get more use out of your amended soil because you can plant things closer together, because you're not having to worry about them running into one another because they're all growing up. Better air circulation for the plants themselves. Now this is not my garden. Most of these photos are all from my garden, but this was just too good on the internet for me not to utilize. Better air circulation because the breeze can be blowing through, and consequently any disease organisms that are floating around are not going to be able to settle because the air circulation is so good. Consequently, you'll have fewer pest problems because it isn't going along the ground, and so you have all the creepy crawlies or the diseases up in the air because of the air circulation. And ultimately, you get a clean harvest. You don't have to be dealing with all these fruits being on the ground or searching for them. They're all up in the air. Sorry. Okay. Sorry, my own interruption of myself. Okay. Another element is lengthening the seasons. And this is what I'm talking about now as being the transition time. You're planting despite what the weather is at the moment or what you think it's going to become, because we never really know. We have a general idea of it getting cooler from here, but we don't know just how long it's going to continue to be summer. The row cover will help germinate the seeds and a bit of shading, and that's why I'm suggesting this, that you utilize this over your plants this weekend, at least the more tender plants. You can lengthen the seasons just by fertilizing more and continuing to water and continuing to harvest. Especially with the peppers, this is an issue for me because I really like my peppers very ripe. And consequently, I have to be very concerned that I'm not letting them mature beyond the point that they're going to automatically make their natural hormonal shift into bolting. And this is like the whole point of plants is to reproduce themselves. And we're counting on that by turning them into food at some step before that, or sometimes utilizing the seeds. But if I want a really ripe fruit like this, I have to bet that the plant isn't going to think, oh, I've done my job, I've set my fruit, it's gotten very ripe, and so now I can die. I want it to be very ripe. I want to pick it, and I want it putting out much more blossoms so that it'll make more fruits. So that's the one issue that is a possible problem if you like fruits that are very, very ripe. Okay, irrigation is a three-part bit of instruction here. Number one is the depth. Number two is the frequency. And number three is the methods. So we'll go through each of these. And this is when I think the most common question is, how frequently should I water? So depth is really the one that determines the other two elements. You need it to be the same depth year round because of whatever it is that you're growing. You need to get the irrigation depth down to the bottom of whatever the root is going to be that is genetically determined by that particular crop. So here, shallow crops down to about a foot, moderately deep to 2 feet, and really deep to 3 feet. So you need to water in that area to get the water down to that depth. So frequency depends on the weather and how long it took to dry out in that space. A general rule is that spring about once every 3 weeks, summer once a week, and more according to the specific plant. Like this has lots of foliage, so it's a bulk foliage and the respiration rate, because the plant is really just gasping and when it's 95 degrees, so you're watering it more frequently. And then fall again once every couple weeks, and winter maybe once a month if there's no rain. So the methods are up to you to determine which is most convenient for you. A handheld hose. Here I've filled a basin by my fruit tree that I've just planted, or is 2 years old. Overhead sprinklers. They wash off the dust so the plants can photosynthesize more effectively. But they're really not to be counted on for any kind of deep watering. Your mini tube emitters are great for a specific plant, even though it generally doesn't cover the entire area around the plant. The soaker hose under mulch, here I've got it around my tangerine tree. Now this will have another layer of mulch on top of this. I was photoing this just so you could see the spacing, which is about 9 inches between each rung here. And then you cover with this with more of the mulch so that the water will not evaporate, it'll go straight down. And the last one here is these 5-gallon containers that I really got from my father-in-law, and the gallon size, and so I upgraded to the 5-gallon size, burying it so that here the soaker hose, the wand goes into the bucket, it fills with water, it overflows, and it waters this entire area around here. And also the holes at the bottom of this bucket, these are the ones if you buy a 5-gallon ornamental shrub or you buy a fruit tree or something, it's automatically got the holes in the bottom. So it's letting the water out a good foot down into the soil, which then means that these plants, which are planted around it, you water them a little bit in that hole, but your really intent is to get the roots deep so that the water that's coming out of the container down here is feeding these plants. So that when we have this kind of weather, the plants are doing fine because their roots are a good foot down. Mulch, we're just about at the end here. 5 great things it does. It conserves the soil moisture because it really is covering the soil. It moderates the soil temperature. It keeps weeds from germinating, and any that do are easy to pull. It lessens erosion. And as it breaks down, it enriches the soil nutrition and the texture. And consequently, your beneficial insects and the beneficial microorganisms in the soil are fed with that as it breaks down. So the last thing, of course, what we're really doing all this for is harvesting. And this is really up to individual taste preferences, like those baby gourmet things, or which varieties of tomatoes you consider to be the best, as opposed to my trying it and feeling, well, that's the most insipid tomato I've ever tasted. Why would they have suggested that to me? Some people, of course, are sensitive to acid, and so there are some white and light orange tomatoes that have very little acid in them, and so those folks are able to have some varieties of tomatoes that they can really tolerate. The uses of all these plants, whether it's the foliage, the blossoms, the immature fruit, the different stages of maturity, the mature fruit or seeds, all of those are potential for each of the plants that you're growing. And of course, the harvesting of the outer leaves that I already had discussed, getting more food value, but we're not having to keep planting new stuff.
Oh my God.
Saving seeds is the last thing I'll just mention. This is a longer version of this is on my blog. I think it's August of 2017. For tomatoes and other wet things, like cucumbers, squash, any of those things that are wet around the seeds, you have to ferment them because potentially they have viruses in them. And it's not a problem eating the item now, but if you save the seeds and the virus was in there, that would be a problem for next year's crop. And of course, dry seed is like chili peppers. You just let it dry and then you're all set to plant it. And that's it. Eat your yard.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Yvonne.
Sure.
That was just amazing. Before everybody starts leaving, would you give us the address again of your blog? And I'm going to write
Sure.
it down.
It's gardeninginla.net.
So gardeninginla.net.
Right.
I'm going to be a frequent visitor.
Very good. Let me show this to you. I should have done this at the beginning. Here is the, this was the text of my PowerPoint. And here's the website, www.gardeninginla.net. And if you need to email me, it's gardeninginla@gmail.com. Now, the couple of things that I think will be of interest on the website is not only the blog, which is about every couple weeks I talk about what literally is happening in my garden. I go up and I take photos and then I talk about it, and this time I'm going to be talking about starting the seeds. So there's a very timeliness, especially for you guys, because we are literally so close to one another between Burbank and Pasadena. But on my blog page, there is a search bar. On the right-hand side of the blog is the archived, all the old blogs that I put on. And right above that is a search bar. So if you type in starting seeds or tomatoes or whatever it is that you have a term that you have question about, it will bring up all the other blogs that I have written over all these years. And so it'll give you some great information. You won't have to be searching through on your own. There's also a web links section that has University of California websites and non-University of California websites. And also there's some of these past webinars and Zoom meetings that have been taped that I put on there on different topics. And there's a news section. When I find fascinating stuff online that gets sent to me, I post them. So there's some fun articles there as well.
That's all great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So gardeninginla.net.
Right.
I really appreciate that. This has been an excellent and timely talk, and we do have some questions. Can I read these to you and you give us? All right. So first question, what happens to growing vegetables when temperatures exceed 100 degrees?
They die. No, I mean, well, what happens is that it's that combination of too much heat and the root system trying to get the water from the soil up to each of those leaves. Early in the season, if you remember with your tomatoes, you may have had some blossom end rot, which is the tomato that was kind of a flat and brownish area on the bottom. That's because it got too hot, too sudden, before you noticed it in order to get enough water to the plant. And consequently, if you think literally, the water is coming up through the roots, into the stems, into the foliage, and the very last thing it can get to is the fruit.
Oh.
So what happens when it was too hot too quickly there's not enough calcium in those cells of the end part of the fruit, and it literally dies back. Now, you can
Okay.
still use those fruits. I mean, assuming you can let them ripen a little more, and just cut that part off. So you can get maybe a couple mouthfuls off of that tomato. It's not like you have to throw it away, absolutely.
Okay.
But what on a plant generally, it's just that it's making it work too hard to get the moisture to the greenery, the foliage, and the fruits, and consequently you may have some die back. Now, when we had that tremendous heat a couple years ago, my first message out to everyone, and I'm sure it will be this time next week, don't prune anything, because it may look like it's completely shriveled up and dead, but you don't know, especially with some of like your fuchsias or your trees, the branches may be fine underneath. It's just that all that foliage has been zapped by the heat. So you don't want to stress the plant more by pruning some of it. And also, when it finally starts to grow the new growth, which may take a month or two, then you will notice just how much damage there was. And you probably will be surprised that it still was viable this far out instead of back here where you would have cut it. So it's a problem for the plants. It's just trying to grow too fast to get that water out to the entire plant.
All right. And that actually takes care of our next question. So I'll ask you another. If I plant different squash or cucumber varieties near each other at the same time, are they going to produce fruit true to my expectation, or will they crossbreed and produce who knows what?
The fruit that each of those produces in the year you planted the seed will be fine. It's what you expect.
Okay.
But if you saved the seed, that might be the weird stuff.
Okay.
So for example, one year my dad planted a blue Hubbard, which is a round warty thing that literally is blue. And he also planted a banana squash, which was long and orange. The fruit was fine that year, but when he crossed it, and you know, the banana squash was the male plant onto the female of the blue Hubbard, and vice versa, each of those came up with something completely different, like a big round yellow warty thing or a long blue thing. So it's the next year that becomes the problem.
Okay.
If you save the seed.
Thank you. Here's another question. How many flower heads will a Romanesque plant produce?
Okay, cabbage and cauliflower are not like broccoli. Broccoli, once you cut that center one, it'll come up with all sorts of little ones. But the cauliflower and the cabbage only put up one. So it's a one-timer. Once you harvest that, pull out the plant, put it in the compost pile, and plant something else.
Good to know, good to know. And this is the first year that I cut my main broccoli stem, and now I'm getting all these little baby stems, baby heads on the side, and I'm very excited.
And that's one thing that I really recommend with broccoli. Cut that center one as soon as you possibly can, when it's literally just 2 inches large, because then it'll push all those side little ones that are already bite size. You know,
That's
why do
great.
the work?
That's great to know. I waited till my head got as big as my head. So who knows? Maybe this coming sun is going to kill all my babies.
Well, just make sure that you've got it well deeply watered, because that's the one thing. Even if some of them look a little shrivelly, just let it continue. And at some point, it will get cooler, and then your broccoli and all those things that you still have harvesting now, like your chard and your kales and all that, they love the cool weather. So try to keep them going. You can also be planting new stuff, but some of those that you do already are very happy with, let them go.
Okay.
I mean, let them continue bearing.
Next question. How do you know when beets are ready to pick?
When it's the size that you prefer. Like some of them, you know, they're an inch. Some, I prefer mine to be about 1.5 inches. Also, the variety may make a difference. Like carrots, you want it to grow quickly and preferably in the cool weather. But I was surprised my first year back here from living in Davis for 20 years was that my beets went through the complete summer and started growing again, elongating in the fall, and they were still very delicious. I had expected them that going through the summer, it would be pretty tough and fibrous and not sweet any longer. But because I had kept them well watered, they were doing fine. So that is very much a preference, is when you pick them. And again, try the greens, you know, save some of them for just keep harvesting the greens and tossing them in salad or stir frying them or soups or whatever. And that way you'll have a double crop off of the beets, just so that you save some plants just to be the beet, whereas others are going to be for the foliage.
It's low.
Okay. Panelists, if you could refrain from talking, that would help us. Now, I have a question here. Do you have advice on protecting veggies from rodents and birds?
Yeah, this is a hard one. Most of the, what is called a physical deterrent, you're putting literally a cage around it, like chicken wire, you know, you bend it so it fits over the plant.
Okay.
It's really hard, you know, because this is a buffet for all those animals. So as best as you can create a physical barrier, that's going to be more protective. Now, what I do for starting my seeds, and there's one bed that I utilize the whole section, it's probably 20 feet by a foot. And what I do is I use the, after I've sown the seeds in there and labeled them, I'll use the fruit tree netting, the pieces that have been ripped over the years. I will put that on top, stabilized by a couple of sticks to hold them about 6 inches above the seed bed. And that way, but the sticks are on the sides so that there's no way that an animal can actually get into it underneath. And that really enables, I have a lot of skunks as well that dig into the soil wherever I have, you know, just planted something. So utilizing that fruit tree netting has worked very well for me.
Okay, thank you. Due to the, another question, due to the expected extreme heat, should I pick all my, and it says starting, to get red tomatoes now?
I would not, but I would find something to literally cover it so that it, you know, the sun will not get directly on it and sunburn the fruits. And then after, you know, and get it really deeply watered. And then just keep your eye on it. And you may find that some of them
I'll get bored.
in a couple days is going to be a problem or not. So then you'll harvest those.
All
Unless
right.
you want a lot of green tomatoes, you know, and you've got a recipe for that. So, but I wouldn't automatically do it.
I have a thank you here for you, but I also have more questions. Do you have advice for an insecticide? I use water with hot peppers and garlic, but that does not always work.
Yeah, I don't recommend any of the products. Depending on what it is, you may want to check with like an Armstrong nursery or, you know, Rogers nurseries, some of the ones that are really have knowledgeable staff. You know, don't go to Home Depot and hope to get somebody answering a question. They'll just guide you to where all the insecticides are. The other thing that is a real place is the Integrated Pest Management Program. Let me get the website here. This is on the university. It's great because there's, it's ipm.ucanr.edu. Now that stands for Integrated Pest Management, University of California, Agriculture, Natural Resources. But it's just those initials. And there is, the first thing that come up is a photograph that says home, garden, turf, and landscape pests. And that's the one you click on. And then there's a pest notes library and a quick tips library. And then also a listing of all the different kinds of plants, like pests in the garden, and there's vegetables and melons, fruit trees, flowers. So you can click on each one of those areas in order to then find the particular pest that you're looking at. And for example, under tomatoes, there'll be maybe 30 different pests. So if you don't know what it is that's eating your tomatoes, you just click on tomatoes and then it'll show pictures and have descriptions all the way along there. And the pest notes library and the quick tips library are just quick ways to find exactly what you need.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I have another question. Different colored bell pepper seeds are sold separately, but are they all green that ripen to the other colors, or are they truly different plants?
No, they're all peppers. It's just that they have been selected to bring forth that particular mature color. So they're all green, and then they will turn into their specific color, unless it's, of course, it's a green one. I mean, it's green when it's mature.
All right, so really then if you buy them by the color, what you're buying is predictability.
Yeah, yeah. And they'll all basically be about the same. I do particularly like the ones that are labeled as pimento peppers, because they are very much more sweet when they're very mature. And that's something that we particularly like. You know, now some people apparently, you know, their gastrointestinal systems do not allow them to enjoy peppers and cucumbers. And something about both. When the pepper or the cucumber is very young, very immature, there's more of this chemistry problem that goes on. So sometimes those people will not have such a problem if they get like the pimento pepper and wait until it's very, very mature.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of questions asking you to repeat things. And what I want to say about that, instead of asking you to run through the info again, everyone who attended today will get a copy of the recording and you can run it again.
Oh, very good.
So, but I do have a new question.
Kathy, please do send that to me as well.
I shall.
I'll put that on my website.
All right. And actually, I think that's it on the questions. Yvonne, this was wonderful. Thank you for doing this with us today.
Absolutely.
I want to say also that you're coming back here in April and you're going to talk to us about container gardens. I think the title is, I think it is Container Gardening. Do you remember the title? For everyone.
Well, that's it.
Gardens for everyone.
Right.
So
and one of the nice things about that to look forward to is that I do talk about the specifics of container gardening, some of the benefits and down points of it, and then techniques. But a great deal of the time I spend on lots of great looking, crazy kinds of containers. So it definitely is a very fun one and not anywhere near as long as this particular one.
I have one more message for you, Yvonne. Don't go away. Nancy Siebert says, hello, Yvonne.
Oh,
I'm now living in Oakdale.
oh, very good. That's one of our master gardeners.
Great. Thanks for joining us today, Nancy. And Terry Davis thanks you. And Sarah Detman thanks you. And I think we all thank you. So,
sure. Yes. Well, I do, as you can tell, I love chatting gardening. So, you know, if you do have particular questions, go ahead and email me at thegardeninginla@gmail.com. And if any of you, once you've gone through a bit of the different menu items on the website, you can subscribe. It's free. Just email me and say you want to subscribe. And that's when I will send out to you the different blogs. I mean, when I post another blog on there, it will be that. And any of the news items and also the job opportunities. So if any of you are looking to get played, as my husband puts it, get paid for playing mud patties, then that will be of interest to you as well.
Great. Well, that brings this pretty much to a close. To all attendees, if you found our program interesting, you will receive a copy, a link to the webinar so you can review it again or share it, point people to it. If you would like, you can join our garden club. That information will also be sent, or you can make a donation if you don't want to actually join the club. Next month in October, we will be having a similar speaker event with Ernesto Sandoval, who is UC Davis. You know him, huh?
Yeah, of course.
He's the UC Davis Botanical Conservatory Director, and his wonderful talk is on plant hormones and how we can manage, know and manage them better for better results. So see you all next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
There's one more question. Let's just look. Okay, Sandy, I will try to include the chat in the, somebody's asking if all the questions and answers will be sent. I will see if I can do that.
Well,
So-
it's still recording, so it'll all be one unit, I think.
Oh, there you are. Of course. So good. Thank you.
All right.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.